So if everybody's not familiar, I'm Ian. I'm a physical therapist assistant, and I work at IPA Physio in Portland. And I'm really excited today to share with you guys some information that I've been learning on photobiomodulation and how it interacts with the body to help control the inflammatory processes that we experience, but also to help regenerate and repair tissue, both in injuries that we suffer just on a daily basis, like minor aches and strains, to conditions that we might have been living with for a really long time that have been creating degeneration maybe in our joints, or maybe even degeneration in different structures of our bodies. So that's going to be kind of the intention of the presentation, is kind of a sampling of a lot of different treatments that we provide. And I hope you guys are able to leave with a bit more information or some clarity on some questions that you might have had, either during our presentation time or in the Q&A session right at the end. Okay, so general agenda for the presentation. I'm going to get a little bit into some of the history about photobiomodulation and kind of how it came to be, because I think it's important in knowing where some of the roots of it began, and how it's evolved in just a relatively short amount of time, and it continues to grow, which is really interesting. And it's so cool, some of the new research that keeps coming out. And I learn something every week as I'm reviewing more of the research and the studies and experiments happening all over the world. And it's really cool information. Then we're going to get into just some basic science. Nothing too heavy. I know it's in the evening and we're all kind of tired. So just some basic science, just to kind of get the concept of how we introduce light into our cells and how that creates this really cool reaction of healing in our body. And then I've got a few samples again of some treatments that we provide in our clinic on a daily basis. And keep in mind, this is by no means a full list of stuff that we offer in the clinic or that other people can benefit from when they're receiving photobiomodulation. But it'll give you a good understanding of some core concepts that are seen when any part of the body is treated with it. And it's really cool. As soon as you know the basics, it can be utilized anywhere in the body. And then we'll learn a little bit about how different pharmaceuticals like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and even ice, how that compares to the effects of photobiomodulation. And then I've got a couple options that I've seen from a couple of different manufacturers, and one that we have that we utilize in the clinic that are some home unit options for people. Okay, so when we're even talking about photobiomodulation, we're basically going over a few core concepts here. We're trying to accelerate the healing process in the body. We're trying to control the inflammatory process. We're trying to enhance the repair process of acute and chronic injuries. So it doesn't matter what stage of healing you're in, the body will be enhanced as far as the repair that can go. And we do all this by targeting structures that are both local, meaning the area that was injured, or perhaps painful, and the surrounding tissue structures. So it could be anywhere else in the body. We'll talk a little bit about how that even happens and why that's important as well. All this treatment is going to reduce the likelihood of an acute injury now turning into something chronic down the road, or even a chronic condition worsening. And we can kind of get control of it a bit and hopefully even reverse some of the effects. Another cool thing that we're trying to do on a general scale is controlling the accumulation of scar tissue. So that would be something that we want to avoid so that we don't have a re-injury down the road, or we can at least reduce the likelihood of that. So some of these examples, we can kind of think about all these concepts like these firefighters here, and they're trying to contain a fire that might have started off small, but maybe it's growing into something larger as more surface or area becomes inflamed. So this is similar to how we treat most dysfunctions in the body or most disorders by not only targeting it with our instruments to try to treat the epicenter of the injury, but also by trying to control the spread of some of the surrounding inflammation or dysfunction to other parts of the body. Okay, so this guy here is Andre Mester. He's a doctor out of Hungary. He was found to be one of the first ones to really discover and utilize photobiomodulation. At that time, it wasn't called photobiomodulation, and actually Dr. Mester was initially using a high-powered laser that he had custom built, and he was trying to destroy tumors that were implanted in the bellies of rats. It was a big area of medicine at the time and a kind of a hot research topic. So he had this custom-built laser. He was trying to destroy these tumors, but what he found was the power of the laser he had was actually very low power. So it was nowhere near what he had ordered, apparently. And he started to notice that the incisions over where the tumors were implanted were healing rapidly. So the research that he ended up doing after this observation kind of turned into what photobiomodulation is today. He initially started to do treatments on skin ulcers that were the result of either diabetes or even just burns in skin and a whole bunch of other skin defects. And every single time he was doing treatments, he would find that the treated wound was improving and regenerating faster than all the different controlled wounds, whether it was on animals or in clinical trials or just in laboratory studies. He was also able to initially discover the anti-inflammatory effects of using photobiomodulation. One of the other cool things that he noticed pretty early on was that he was able to stimulate fibroblasts. And fibroblasts are just cells that produce collagen. And if you know much about collagen, you know that it's one of the things with it is it's the most abundant protein in the body. And we rely on this a lot for regenerating our tissue structure. All of these observations, ultimately led the way for studies that are being done now. And earlier on, there wasn't much ways to prove some of these things, but nowadays we have ways that we can really look at some of the molecules once we measure certain things after studies are performed, and we can have a little bit more certainty and validity in some of the research that's taking place nowadays. And some of the earlier studies that Dr. Mester was able to observe. So the earlier term that he coined was biostimulation, and that's gone through all kinds of different changes as far as names go over the years, which has prompted a challenge as far as identifying quality research in photobiomodulation. So I think it was around 2015 that they ultimately decided on the term photobiomodulation, which kind of all encompasses all the research and all the different names that have changed over the last, 60 years or so. So this is going to be one example of one of the treatments that Dr. Mester was involved with. So in this photo, we're going to see just the back of a rat. And in this red circle, this is an area that he was treating with his red laser. And the wound that was next to it, he found that this wound was healing rapidly, even though it wasn't being treated. And as a comparison, the wounds over on the other side are obviously nowhere near as completely healed as the wound that was treated. And these are experiments that were being done in the 60s and 70s. So all the stuff that we have nowadays to really bring a little bit more specificity to our dosages, and some of the instruments and the different power settings we have available. The results that we're able to make with ChangeWise on different inflammatory conditions and painful conditions that we experience, even on degeneration. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's really cool to see. And he was able to discover one of the earlier observations of what's called the systemic effects. So even though he treated this area here, he was able to make changes in parts of the body that aren't even the part that was treated. And this is an important concept to take home. We can use this in all different structures of the body. One of the main things that we're looking at when doing treatments through systemic effects is going to be by trying to irradiate some of the white blood cells that travel through the body. And that can have a really powerful effect on our body's immune response and how well we can heal. Okay, so clinically, when we're applying this treatment, we're trying to get a series of reactions from the body by introducing this technology. To get some of the basics of the technology down, we have to kind of understand what we're trying to do first. So photobiomodulation in itself involves the use of just red and infrared light. And again, the intention of it is to resolve inflammation and to promote our tissues to heal. All the treatments are going to be non-invasive. The light technology in itself is not thermal. And in all the research and all the studies, that there's been no side effects that have been reported. So whenever we're introducing light into the body, all these images here on the right side are things that we're trying to improve with every single treatment that we do. So we're trying to make a difference in the blood vessel formation. We want to have an increase in how those blood vessels are being formed. That's going to not just temporarily improve blood flow to an area, it's going to actually change the circulatory system and how well that area of the body can heal and withstand injury down the road. We're also making a change in the collagen. From earlier, we talked a little bit about the fibroblast, and by stimulating that, we can improve the ability for the body to repair tissue. We're also making changes in the muscles' ability to regenerate. We're also making changes on bone formation, obviously important if there's been a fracture. And cartilage is a cool thing that we're trying to make changes through just by stimulating the cells that are involved in the production of cartilage. Nerve regeneration is also a really powerful effect that have been seen in countless studies in the ability for nerves to not just repair their protein structures that surround the nerve, but also to induce what's called a neuronal sprouting, which is just literally trying to regrow the nerve. And then, of course, inflammation is one of the heavy hitters and the most reproducible effects of photobiomodulation. And we'll talk a little bit about how that comes about. Okay, so for all of that cool stuff to take place, we have to use some kind of instrument and some technology to get the light into the body. So that's where the red and infrared light comes in. Now, these wavelengths are optimized between a rough band of about 660 nanometers to about 840 nanometers. Those numbers are just in the wavelength spectrum of red and infrared. And the reason that they've found that those wavelengths are ideal is because the wavelengths of those, of those wavelengths, as they're entering the body, the particles that are those, that is the light of those are just photons. So that's just the light particle. And those have to go into the body and enter the cell that we're trying to stimulate. Now, those particles of light are competing with a lot of things that are trying to take that light away. Some of those are going to be hemoglobin. in the blood, also melanin in our skin, and then water on the other side of that spectrum. So this gives us a kind of an optical window of wavelength that they've just determined is the most absorbable. The instruments that we're going to use are LEDs and the non-thermal class 3B laser. There's an image down here in the corner showing one of our red lasers in the clinic. But again, those in the clinic will use a red and infrared wavelength of laser. And then the LED strips here, these are going to be seen in a lot of home units, which are really cool. There's been a lot of research on, is there a benefit of using one or the other? And as we talked a little bit about earlier, as long as you're operating on the systemic effect model, you can make some pretty profound changes in the body by using LEDs, solely LEDs. You can get a little extra power and some depth into some deeper structures using a laser, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. So for a lot of the effectiveness of this technology to work, research has shown that these diodes, whether it's the LED or the laser, need to not only touch the skin, but ideally even depress into the skin slightly. That's going to help displace some of these areas that are competing with the light absorption. And really the most important parts here are going to be those wavelengths. They're really important, that kind of narrow band there. Also making sure that you have enough power to get the light into the body, and not too much to where you get more of a thermal effect. Okay, so we've got our technology to get the light into the body. We know our wavelengths. Now we need to have something absorb that light. So in this situation, it's been determined that the mitochondria in the cell is our primary target for photobiomodulation. So the mitochondria is going to be within our cells. And the mitochondria is basically our cell's energy producing factory. It's commonly known as the powerhouse of the cell. And it's responsible for producing an energy source called ATP. We'll just refer to it pretty much as our cell's energy. It's been shown that when cells are damaged or dysfunctional, or if there's inflammation present in the body, a lot of different factors can contribute to this happening, but it's been shown when these cells are damaged, they will, hold on one second, I'm getting an error on my Zoom here. Okay, so it's been shown when there's damage produced in some of these cells, that the ability for these mitochondria to produce ATP or energy is not as efficient. It ends up being significantly hindered. We know through experiments and research that when these cells are exposed to these wavelengths of light, their energy production is restored, and in some situations, significantly enhanced. There's a lot of factors at play in how that process takes place. And one of the things that's a role player in that is nitric oxide ends up being built up within that cell, or within that part of the cell, the organelle, the mitochondria. And when absorption takes place, that nitric oxide can leave the mitochondria, allowing oxygen to better be utilized. So all that's really happening is you're basically just trying to free up space so that you can use oxygen and better have efficiency with how that cell can create fuel. All of that absorption of the light will ultimately start chain reactions as a result of that energy being produced. Those chain reactions are what then go on to make new cells. So it stimulates growth factors. It stimulates all kinds of different things from happening. We'll talk a little bit more about what happens when that ATP or that energy is produced. So one side effect when producing or when displacing that nitric oxide from the mitochondria is that you're going to have a dilation of some of the blood vessels and some of the other vascular structures, and ultimately have an improvement in a short-term blood flow, as well as controlling of some edema or swelling in the area. One side note, while doing a lot of research lately, there's research that's showing now that in cells that are stimulated that have had their mitochondria deactivated, they are also able to exhibit stimulatory effects. So this is kind of an ongoing bit of research as we continue to learn more and more about the effects of photobiomodulation in the body. Okay, so ATP, or that energy from the cell, when it's created, it has a variety of different kind of cool things that it's producing in the body. So just making that extra ATP, you're going to have an enhancement in that cell's ability to survive through a lot of different variety of factors, with reducing the stress that it is going through free radicals and all kinds of different things that are going to compromise that cell's ability to survive. You're going to enhance its operating performance. So it's going to just be a more efficient cell. And you're also going to signal through the creation of that ATP, more cells to grow and initiate their repair processes. So this image over here on the side is going to be a rough breakdown of what some of those main benefits are when the ATP is produced. So again, the cell proliferation. So that's just where ATP is created from the cell, and that's going to induce these fibroblasts through stimulation to create their collagen. It's going to stimulate chondrocytes, or cells that just make cartilage. It's going to also enhance the ability for bone cells to regenerate, and again, nerve tissue. And then on the other side, inflammation control, another important factor or core concept of photobiomodulation. Creating that ATP is going to enhance these white blood cells and the role that they serve in the inflammatory process. The result of that is going to be reducing your body's degeneration in that area, as well as its ability to repair faster and reducing pain. All good things at the end of the day. So that was a whole bunch of information. Quick recap on that, down here in the corner. When our cells are inflamed or in a degenerative state, they don't work very well. And a lot of things can make them in that position. Inflammation is one of them. Energy production is going to be inefficient in those cells. Photobiomodulation will improve that energy production when the cells absorb the light, and that's going to improve their ability to control inflammation, ultimately overcoming that inflammatory state, which is going to transition into faster and more complete healing of any tissue in the body. Pretty cool. Okay, so here's a sample of some of the treatments that we're going to be discussing in the next few slides here. A little bit about inflammation, tendon, nerve repair, how we treat areas of the spine, muscle strains, even brain tissue, and how it works with platelet-rich plasma in treating areas of the body that have been treated with that. Okay, so starting off here, what is inflammation even? Inflammation is just going to be our body's normal response to protect itself from infection, injury, or disease. And it typically will only last for a few days, with give or take some certain situations, it might last a little bit longer. So the signs of inflammation are going to be commonly redness, heat, swelling, and pain. Having that doesn't always mean you have inflammation, but those are some common signs and symptoms. When we have inflammation in the body, the whole process of it involves that defense of the local environment. There's going to be tissue destruction occurring, which is important to realize that when you're inflamed, there's tissue destruction happening. And there's also a signaling process. A lot of cells that are in that area act as distress beacons, and they signal for certain cells to be in that area and to stay there, creating this active tissue destruction and sustaining some of these signs and symptoms. So resolving this process is ideal. So when there's inflammation, there's going to be white blood cells that are going to be some initial cells that are on the scene. And one of the cells that we're going to talk about is the macrophage. So the macrophage is like a hungry white blood cell that roams around and it eats debris and leftover stuff from an injury. So really helpful cell. The presence of this macrophage has two main signaling roles. So it doesn't just go around and eat stuff. It also is responsible for signaling for either inflammation to continue or for inflammation to start to resolve. And when it signals for inflammation to resolve, it's going to also signal for other cells to come in and start to repair, like those fibroblasts that repair with new collagen. It's been shown that in a lot of conditions that have lots of inflammation or even degenerative structures, that there's a very large presence of these macrophages in the area that are in that stage one where they're kind of sustaining the inflammatory process. We know through all kinds of experiments that when the body is exposed to photobiomodulation, that these macrophages have a dramatic shift in their signaling type to more of that anti-inflammatory role, which is really, really cool that it makes that shift. And important for areas of the body that maybe were having trouble making that shift on their own. A lot of variables can make that happen, but we wanted to expedite that process if we can. All right, so in the chronic state, that's going to also help resolve that chronic inflammation as well. So no matter what kind of inflammation is present in that region, photobiomodulation will assist with that shift. Oh, so this paper in the corner here was written by Dr. Michael Hamblin. He is a researcher. He's one of the most well-known researchers in the field of photobiomodulation. And this was a paper that he wrote where he basically just consolidated all the research that had been done. I think this was put out in 2017. All the research that's been done on the effects of photobiomodulation on inflammation. So it's a very heavy read. But it definitely has, if you have any questions on what some of the details are with inflammation, you can most likely find it in this paper. Okay. Oh, and by the way, all these articles I'll be posting, I think I might have said it earlier, but I'll be posting them in the description box of this video on YouTube tomorrow. So if you want to review any of these articles on your own, I'll link all that stuff down there for you guys. Okay, so moving on to tendon injuries. So tendon injuries are pretty notorious for being challenging to heal. They're kind of common. If you've ever had like Achilles tendonitis or pain in the elbow on the inside or the outside, maybe it was called golfer's elbow or tennis elbow. Some of these areas of the body, once you have an injury there, they can take a while to heal, whether it's in an inflammatory state, which would be termed a tendinitis, or it's in more of a degenerative condition, which is termed a tendinosis. Either situation you have, it's going to be painful, most likely, and again, just be a little bit of a lengthy time to heal. So the tendinitis is going to be typically more of an acute onset, like an injury that occurred. There's a lot of pain, a lot of inflammation present. We know that photobiomodulation will help with inflammation, but what about when our injury has switched and now it's become more of a degenerative condition? Photobiomodulation has been shown to help that a lot as well. So in one of the ways with a tendinosis, as the tendon becomes a little bit more frail, maybe it was injured once and it didn't heal completely due to various reasons. Maybe the inflammatory process went on for too long and the muscle or the tendon partially healed, but it was injured again. Often through repetitive tasks, we'll find that that's a factor that sustains this process for quite a while. So when we're having a repair of a tendon, we'll ideally like to see the tendon look like this picture on the left, which is a nice, strong, parallel orientation of these tendon fibers. But oftentimes, especially when we're in a degenerative state, we'll see that the tendon looks a little bit more like this mess here. There's all this extra space here. There's no real orientation or structural anything really with how these fibers are laying down here. So you can see how this would leave us in a state where we're going to be likely to have a re-injury. So how does photobiomodulation help any of this? So when we treat these structures with photobiomodulation, we have a strong effect on the inflammatory process, but we're also going to stimulate the fibroblast activity to repair collagen. And not just any collagen, we're going to find that we're having a stimulatory effect on a stronger type 1 collagen. There's lots of different types of this collagen fiber. But in this situation, the type 1 collagen is going to be ideal and desirable. So the result of all this is reduced scar tissue, a stronger repair, less likely to re-injure. And then when you combine it with other treatments, such as physical therapy, with maybe some eccentric loaded exercise or manual therapy techniques, you're going to stand a better chance to go from this mess of a degeneration of tendon tissue to more of this healthy, strong, fully repaired structure. This paper in the corner here was actually a review of over 200 studies that were done on the Achilles tendon of rats. And without a doubt, the most reproducible effects in this situation were an improvement in inflammation and the ability for the body to enhance regeneration of the collagen structure and to assist with the reorganization of that collagen. So we have a pretty cool blog written on our website as well that goes into some detail about tendinitis versus tendinosis, how photobiomodulation can help, as well as some other therapeutic benefits to some exercise. Okay, so moving on to nerve repair. So nerve damage can come in a lot of different packages. We'll oftentimes see nerve damage as the result of crush injuries, even just deep cuts. Diabetes can contribute to nerve damage. Multiple sclerosis, especially in some of the surrounding structures of the nerve, can start to degenerate. Sometimes even just swelling can put pressure on nerves and cause damage, or surgeries, even in areas of the body that weren't even being treated for a nerve, can be injured. Also nerve entrapments, such as maybe at the inner elbow, or any structure where a nerve has a groove that it runs through, and it might just get a little bit stuck there. Obviously, you know, some big ones where nerves exit the spine, you can get a pinch in one of those areas there and create an inflamed or damaged nerve. Carpal tunnel syndrome is a really common syndrome to have, which involves compression of nerves and irritation of nerves down at the wrist. In any of these situations, it's important to remember that photobiomodulation is not just treating symptoms, such as maybe something topical or a hot pack. It's focusing on those structures that are assisting in repairing the tissue itself, whether it's the repair of the nerve axon or the proteins that surround the nerve that assist with improving that signal. All those structures we're actually trying to repair all those structures while dealing with the inflammatory process. So in any situation, it's been shown time again that there's an improvement in the nerve function or its ability to transmit signals. Also, we're going to have a faster regrowth and again, reduce inflammation of that area. Certain situations, surgery can even be avoided by going a conservative route, such as photobiomodulation, or even following a surgery. Maybe you had a release of a nerve and there's some extra inflammation there and you want to avoid all the stuff that we talked about earlier. So seeking out photobiomodulation would be ideal. So this paper here was another large review. This one published in 2018, looking at about the last 10 years of research regarding how photobiomodulation works on nerve regeneration. One of the cool things that they found was a relatively large range of dosages. So if you recall back to that optical window from earlier, where the wavelengths were around that 660 to 840, this study looked at a little bit wider range than that, and they all had positive effects, which is really, really important to know, and awesome news for that matter, in that there's other systems out there, other photobiomodulation systems, and even for people using home units, that it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all treatment. It can really be a little bit more diverse, and you can still expect to see a lot of these same benefits. And without a doubt, again, they found that the effects on the inflammation in the region, as well as the nerve regeneration, so the speed at which it regenerated, were all the most reproducible effects. Okay, so next moving on to the spine. Just a quick overview on some areas that we treat with the spine. So some of the more common diagnoses that we might see in regards to the spine would be maybe a stenosis or herniated disc, degenerative joints, whether it's in the back of the spine or the front. It could be even the ligamentous structures that surround and help stabilize the spine, or any of the muscles that cross the joints of the spine or help stabilize our spine. All these structures are treated and can be treated with photobiomodulation. So some of these structures can be quite deep, as far as maybe the spinal cord itself, or where these nerve roots are exiting out of the side of this spine model. So this model here would just be a low back model, and it would be facing towards the left of the screen. All these spiny structures in the back, they would have ligamentous tissue and muscles that would kind of cover all this region back here. But the back would be basically right on the top of where these spine bumps would be on the back of the spine model. The depth from about the tip of this down to where the spinal cord would be is roughly 5 centimeters. And that's actually perfect because that's about the depth that we can achieve with infrared light when we're trying to target those structures. So if that's about 5 centimeters to other joints in the back of the spine, it's only about 1 to 3. And that's going to be more maybe side structures of the neck, or any other joint that we oftentimes will see become degenerated due to just aging, which will shrink down these surfaces and potentially irritate some of these nerve roots. In any situation here, we're looking to improve, again, the inflammatory state and protect the body from any further degeneration in these structures. So this article up here was a paper that was published in The Lancet, and it was a pretty huge study looking at treatments on the neck with photobiomodulation. And they found that not only was inflammation reduced, but the effects were similar to that of using non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication in their ability to relieve pain and control inflammation. But it also had a reduction in what's called oxidative stress. And that's important because that can actually contribute to the cells dying if there's too much of this stress in the body. And all the results of inflammation were shown to last 3 months after the results, which again is a huge deal in that if you compared it to taking an ibuprofen, say, the effects of that are going to last only as long as you're taking the medication. Okay. Next, moving on towards muscle. So muscle in itself is pretty common to be injured, especially in the athletic community. Typically with these injuries, you're going to have pain with the muscle's contraction, also with that muscle lengthening, or with direct pressure on that muscle. You can also note that there's possibly going to be some muscle damage if you've just had surgery. And in any situation here, we're going to be working on the regeneration of that muscle tissue and the inflammatory process there. So this paper here, again, was looking at muscle injury treatment using photobiomodulation in animal models, primarily in rats that were used for these experiments. And again, pretty overwhelming evidence on this with reduced inflammation, lowering that oxidative stress, so helping with cell survival. Another big thing with that oxidative stress is that's one of the key markers for just aging in our body, is too high of this oxidative stress. So this is a huge deal. Also reducing muscle fatigue in muscles that were just overworked and reducing the scar tissue formation. So this picture here is just going to be a diagram showing a muscle fiber. And this green blob is a satellite cell it's a myosatellite cell. So those are basically stem cells that are able to turn into muscle cells. And the way that they activate is through an injury. They'll be basically recruited and they'll go through this differentiation process where they turn into muscle fiber. It's been shown that when we irradiate muscle with photobiomodulation, we can have a greater ability to activate these basically muscle stem cells, which assists in renewal and regeneration of muscle fiber. We also know that when there's an area of the body that's been treated with photobiomodulation, there's more of these available satellite cells when the body needs them. Okay, moving on to the brain. So why would we even consider treating the brain? Well, any part of the body that can be attributed to a high amount of inflammation, reduced blood flow, or degeneration can be treated and benefit from photobiomodulation. So we oftentimes will treat post-concussion disorders or any traumatic brain injury. Alzheimer's disease has been shown to benefit greatly through treatment of photobiomodulation, as well as Parkinson's disease, stroke, even conditions of depression. It's been shown that some of the more reproducible effects with brain treatments are going to be an improvement in blood flow, cell growth and repair, reduced inflammation, the protection of brain cells from any further degeneration, which is another huge thing to take note of here. There's also an improvement of mood, memory, and cognitive function. So the brain is a pretty deep structure and there's a lot of stuff over it. So how do we even get the light there? Well, one of the methods that's been studied and shown to have really, really good results is through the head. So they call it just transcranial. And the back of the head has been shown to be one of the best locations to penetrate through with infrared light. And conveniently, in studies that looked at how deep we can penetrate light through the top of the head with hair, the skull, even there's coverings around the brain that are kind of thick coverings called the meninges. You're able to penetrate through all these structures and go into brain tissue. And the depth that they found was 5 centimeters. And again, that's pretty much our depth that we can hit with infrared light. So this is great news for treating these structures. Alzheimer's disease, as a side note here, is the most common form of dementia. One of the hallmark signs of Alzheimer's disease is neuroinflammation, or inflammation in the brain tissue. Photobiomodulation, again, has a powerful effect on inflammation, and it has the ability to turn the cells that are basically like the macrophages, those signaling cells of the brain. It can influence those cells to shift their signal to an anti-inflammatory producing cell, which is a huge deal, as there's not a lot of treatments available in medicine that can do this. So this is going to not only improve the inflammatory state, it's going to protect from further degeneration, but also assist in regeneration of new cells. Okay, moving on to platelet-rich plasma. So this is a type of regenerative medicine. It's a really cool type of medicine, and it relies on our body's platelets that are basically extracted and re-injected back into the body. And that stimulates the body to basically grow new tissue and heal. It's been shown that when you combine photobiomodulation, you treat the area that's been injected with platelet-rich plasma, the results are significantly better. In this paper here, it was a study that looked at 72 rabbits that were either grouped into the photobiomodulation, the PRP, or both, and then they compared that to the controls. And in the results of this paper, they found that each of the photobiomodulation or PRP group had enhanced ability to recover from their injury, but when they were comboed together, the results were just that much better. And again, we have a really cool blog on this topic specifically over on our website in our blog category. But again, I'll post all this stuff later for you guys to review at your convenience. Okay, so inflammation seems to be a big deal. So there's lots of things that can treat inflammation. So how does photobiomodulation work when it's compared to, say, ibuprofen or maybe steroid shots? There's been a lot of research that's compared these two, especially in the long-term management of maybe inflammatory conditions. So this study here looked at rats, again, 54 rats that were treated with photobiomodulation or treated with a topical anti-inflammatory medication over their knees that had basically arthritis, osteoarthritis induced manually into the joint. So there was all kinds of articular degeneration and damage that occurred, a lot of inflammation in the area, and there was even some changes that occurred to the bone structure. And then we see that with osteoarthritis all the time. So in the group that was treated with photobiomodulation, they found that not only was the inflammatory condition resolved, but there was protection and even regeneration of some of the structures that articulate here in the knee joint. There was also an enhancement in the strength of the muscle that surrounded the joint. However, in the anti-inflammatory medication group, there was a pretty decent reduction in the inflammatory process. However, there was further degeneration of the structures, and there was no improvement at all in the actual structures that articulate. And osteoarthritis is definitely one of the leading causes of degeneration in people as far as the joints. So this is an important diagnosis that you should be seeking out the effects of photobiomodulation if you have access to it. All right, just skipping through here because I know we're kind of getting to the end of the presentation. So it's important to just kind of remember in all these situations that there's no side effects when we're using photobiomodulation. And even ibuprofen and other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs come with a variety of potentially harmful interactions with our body and our systems that need to be considered and weighed when comparing the two treatment options. So again, ice is a pretty popular anti-inflammatory. So is there any reason why photobiomodulation would be beneficial instead of ice? Well, new research is starting to show that cryotherapy, or just the use of cold for therapeutic purposes, is actually not as awesome for our body's ability to recover and repair as we thought. When compared to photobiomodulation, a pretty recent paper, just late 2021, came out looking at the effects of photobiomodulation versus ice in the recovery of tissue. And they found that the results were similar as far as the effects on inflammation. However, the photobiomodulation group fared a little bit better as far as the ability to control that process. But as a secondary effect, the entire process of the cells were delayed or are delayed when you're exposing them to ice. So not only is inflammation slowed down, but so is healing. So when we ice frequently on an area, there's going to be more of a control of pain. And that's going to be more of our goal when we're recommending ice to people, is the control of pain, especially a lot of pain, versus its ability to control inflammation. Outside of photobiomodulation, however, there are some other more heavily science-backed options for the control of inflammation. And some of those are going to be compression, elevation, even just active movement, and again, photobiomodulation. Okay, so home units. So it's something that I've been interested in for a while, as there's just not many options available that seem like they hit any of those earlier slides that we talked about, as far as some of those important things to consider when you're giving somebody a home unit or recommending a home unit. So in our clinic, we use the BioFlex system. They're out of Canada, and we don't get any reimbursement or anything for discussing their products. We just think that they really follow the science, and they offer a really great unit. They put out a couple home units, and they recently put out a new home unit that we just got in the clinic, and I'm excited to actually mess around with it and learn more about it. But one of the problems with these home units is that they're oftentimes kind of expensive, and that's mainly due to the regulatory costs to keep them safe, as well as the engineering costs to keep up with all the current research that's evolving, seems like on a daily basis in the field of photobiomodulation. So these two units that I have pictures of, they're both from BioFlex as well. This one in the corner is a smaller unit. It's called the P120. And this one in the corner is the larger unit. It's the P180. And their new model is the arthritis model, which is the one that we just happened to get. So either way, in any situation here, I'm hoping that with some of this information, you have a little bit more knowledge on what to at least look for in a home unit, or what you might be seeking when you look for clinics that offer photobiomodulation to help treat you wherever you might find that you are. Also, make sure that you reach out to their customer support team. One of the big wins for BioFlex is that they are very responsive and they have a very knowledgeable staff working with them. Okay, so as a quick review here, when you are considering treating with photobiomodulation, whether your injury is acute or chronic, keep in mind that you will improve as a result of using photobiomodulation. And the ways that you're going to improve again are controlling that local or surrounding inflammation, improving the collagen production for the faster repair of tissue, and that's going to help with less scar tissue, stimulating the growth of new cells in the body anywhere they are, and protection from further degeneration. And all this is going to be without any side effects. So that's all I have for you guys today. I hope that was important, or sorry, I hope that was helpful for you guys. And you found some of the information interesting and useful. But I'd like to open up this time for anybody that might have some questions or okay, I'm just kind of reading through the chat box here. Got it. Okay. Good night, Catherine. Thanks for being here. Kathleen, thanks again. Appreciate it. Okay, guys. So no problem with questions here. Again, you can watch this over on YouTube again to break down any information that we might have glazed over a little bit. And I'll be posting all those articles in the comment box, or sorry, in the description box of the YouTube page. The website is going to be ipa.physio. And I'll make sure that I post some of the links to the blogs, and that'll also help to pull up the some of the information there. And if you're interested in any of the BioFlex stuff as well, I can put a link to some of the BioFlex stuff in that website as well. And YouTube. Yep, exactly. So anything through that IPA Physio YouTube page, you're gonna, if you just Google search it, you'll be able to pull that right up and see some of our other content on there as well. All right. BioFlex to Thor. That's a good question. I have looked into Thor on their website a little bit. I've never used their equipment, but they are a pretty reputable manufacturer. And I would actually really be interested to try one of their units. As I can't really formulate much of an opinion on it since I haven't actually held their equipment, but they have a very knowledgeable research department. And it seems like I think it's their CEO or one of their heads of their, either their engineering department, or he seems like he's a presence in a lot of their resources. He seems very knowledgeable. And I think they have a lot of really good content on their website. And I don't think I've seen a home unit offered in their situation. The laser is recessed. Yeah, that I've seen some pictures of some of their products, and they seem to have like a large glass display that is covering some of their units. So that would leave a little bit too much space potentially between their light diode, whether it's the LED or the laser, and the skin. And we want to make sure that we're trying to maximize the absorption of that light. Because as we know, the body is already competing for that light absorption with the blood, the skin, and the water in our body. Okay. Right on. Yep, not a problem. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And that is all.